So when dealing with numbers, there are times when we write that number as a word, and there are times when we write that number as a numeral. And in scholarly writing, you're always going to encounter many numbers. And so whether it be you are conducting a study and you're talking about the participants, you're talking about demographic information such as their ages. When you analyze your statistical results, you're going to talk in terms of percentages and means and medians and all sorts of numbers and times when you have to use numbers in academic writing or scholarly writing. And so let's take a look at when you should use words to express your numbers and when you should use numerals to express your numbers. So the general rule of thumb is that if the number is below 10 or a single digit number, then you should write it out as a word. So your examples here were 5 nurses on duty. The study had 3 conditions. There were students were in 3rd and 6th grade. See, both of those are spelled out. And 8th grade. So all those are single digit numbers. And if you get to 10 and above or double digit numbers, then you should use the numerals. So even in this sentence where we use 3rd, 6th, 8th, when we got here to double digit numbers, 10th and 12th, we changed from words to numerals. So, but as with any rule, there are exceptions, and we'll talk about those in just a few minutes. But just look down at your examples here. And again, this is covered in your APA manual in 6.33 and in your concise guide in 6.2. So there are times when you always use words for numbers regardless of whether it is a single digit or a double digit number. And so numbers that begin a sentence, you're always going to use the word here. So in this example, 50 and 20, you wouldn't put 50 and a percent sign to start a sentence. And you wouldn't put 20 people in, or you would spell out the word. Also, if it's a common fraction, 1/5 of the class, you wouldn't put the 1/5 of the class. And or 2/3 majority, you wouldn't put 2/3 majority. You would spell those out. Another thing I want you to pay attention to here is 1/5 of the class. This is followed by a phrase. So there's no hyphenation. There's no hyphen there. If you're talking about 2/3 majority and it's directly followed by the noun, you add the hyphen to 2/3. So if it were 1/5 majority, then 1/5 would be hyphenated. If it were 2/3 of the class, 2/3 would not be hyphenated because it is followed by a phrase, not an adjective to the noun. And then certain universally accepted phrases. So the 12 apostles, 12 would be written out. You wouldn't say 1, 2 apostles. The 5 pillars of Islam, you would not say the number 5. You would spell out 5 because that's how it's universally accepted. So let's look at cases when you should always use numerals. Certain cases you always use words we just talked about. So cases that you should always use numerals. So if you're talking about a unit of measure and it immediately precedes that unit of measure, you wouldn't spell out a 5 milligram dose. You would just simply put the number 5, or 3 centimeters or 3 inches, or you would just simply put the number 3. A case I can think of and might be relevant would be, so 3 units or 5 units. You would write the numeral 5. In statistical and mathematic functions, you always use the numeral, not the word. Again, fractions and decimals, except those common fractions that we just talked about previously, like the 2/3, the 1/5. In percentages, you always write the numeral, unless, again, it starts a sentence, then you would not. But if you're reporting a percentage, then you always use the numeral. In ratios or percentiles or quartiles, if you're talking about, for instance, the scoring on an instrument or the scoring on a standardized test, you're talking about those ranks and percentiles or quartiles. In times and dates, you always use the numeral, regardless of whether it's 30 seconds or 3 seconds, 3 hours, 2 days. And then in ages, we always use the numeral. Scoring points on a scale, whether it be a sliding scale, a Likert scale, anything like that, we're always going to use the numeral. Exact sums of money. And then if you say the numeral as a numeral, the numeral 2 on a keyboard. So you're going to use that numeral. You wouldn't say the numeral TWO. We're dealing with numbers in a series. Again, we talked about even if you transition into or transition from single to double digits in the series, you would revert back to your traditional convention, whether it be below 10 or single digit would be the number or the numeral, and if it's double digit, 10 or above, you would go with the numeral. So here, the 5th grade, 5th would be the spelled out, and 11th would transition back to the numeral. Here you have, items 3 and 5. If it's before the noun, it's spelled out. If it's after the noun, it's 3 and 5. So if the number comes after a noun, you use the numeral. If the number comes before the noun, you use the traditional convention.